Hey there, Mr. Hutcherson. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. It is a pleasure to have you on this series. I know I've been interviewing a lot of leaders in a different settings for digital transformation, and I was like, man, I haven't interviewed anyone from my own team yet, and it's been absolutely amazing to have you on. I think what is getting close to a year, 9 months, a year, something like that, and you've already made a tremendous impact in terms of how we approach Salesforce implementations, and really opened my eyes in terms of the potential for how Salesforce could be used for digital transformation. So I figured, hey, let's bring this story to everybody else and get everybody a sense of how Salesforce can move the ball forward on digital transformation. So really excited to have you because I know there's so much to share, and there's so much that Salesforce does nowadays that I'd love to hear more detail from you on. So with that, let's get into a little bit of your background and maybe give our audience a little bit of information about how long you've been in Salesforce, kind of your background of experience. That'd be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing me on. Um, yeah, it's really exciting to have engaged with you. Locally here in Orlando with Salesforce. I think for so long I've done it, and it's been very remote, and it's New York or California. So it's been really exciting to watch this kind of come to play right here in my backyard. In terms of Salesforce, I like to joke that I've been doing Salesforce, for essentially my entire life, at least my entire working life. I started really getting involved with the platform in 2000. I say 2006. It really starts all the way back in 2004. Most of my Salesforce passion was driven from my father, and he was a user. He was a Salesforce user. Really in the early days, like 2004, we're talking right at the beginning of kind of Salesforce's journey when they were truly a CRM. And he actually brought me on to work with him. I don't even remember which company it was, but they were using Salesforce, and I came in for my senior project as I was graduating high school in 2004, and I did data entry with D&B Hoovers, and I went through and started to pull out all the sales information and populate these accounts, and it was really fun, and kind of cut my teeth on it. And then a few years later, I was looking for some direction in life, and my dad once again kind of stepped in, and he and I went and got certified, actually right here in Florida. I went to Celebration, Florida, did a week-long administrator class back when certifications were very different than they are now. And he and I both walked away with administration certificates. And then from there, I really sort of jumped into the consulting world. And so I've been consulting on this platform since 2006. Early on, I was with a small company called Blue City Studios, based out of Ohio, just a kind of a two-person shop who brought me on, and I cut my teeth on custom development, learning really the hard way, which is all-nighters with lots of energy drinks and high stakes for the next day that maybe I'm going to get done, maybe not. And I worked with them for many years, probably 3-4 years, and really enjoyed the work. But it was more of a side gig. I was moonlighting. I actually worked as a database administrator for the courthouse at the same time. So during the day, I was doing technical support for the judges downtown, fixing computers and doing a lot of the hardware stuff. But then at night, I was doing some really cool projects for just a variety of companies, and learning how to code. I sort of cut my teeth on development there. And I became their primary developer and architect around technical solutions. And this was back in the Visualforce days. For those people who know Salesforce, they'll recognize that term Visualforce because it's one of the older technologies. Before that, it was S controls, which was just like little JavaScript widgets. But anyway, I did that for a few years, and then finally I made the decision, like, I got to do something with this. Like, I really like it. I shouldn't be moonlighting as a Salesforce developer. I should just be a Salesforce developer. And so I decided to make that leap. And I ended up jumping from a couple companies locally, as a Salesforce developer / PHP developer / do whatever needs to be done to make the system work the way that it needs to, and dance around Sales Cloud and communities. And then I finally got the opportunity with a company called Blue Wolf. Called me up, and I knew about Blue Wolf. I'd known about them for a long time. They're a big solution implementer in the space. Everyone knew about them. They were up and coming. And at the time I heard about them, and they finally came to me and asked if I would be interested in working with them. They weren't up and coming anymore. They were a big deal in the space. And I interviewed with them, and part of our interview process was a programming assignment, and I really just sort of knocked it out of the park. I went a little above and beyond on that assignment. I did, designed it, put some documentation together, kind of really made this thing fancy. So they hired me as an architect, even though I had interviewed as a developer. And that really took me into a whole new world with Salesforce, because up until that point, I was really heavily focused on, building things, writing code and making little pieces work. And they took me into a whole new place where I was actually able to sit down with some customers and actually architect like company-wide solutions. And that's when I really started to branch away from being a developer and moving into the consultancy type world, where I was, really being a consultant and gathering business requirements, interfacing with the customer directly, going broader than Salesforce and looking at the landscape holistically and understanding, what are the different systems of record? How are they going to talk to each other? How does this help your sales rep? What is their day-to-day process, and how is Salesforce going to make that better for them? In a meaningful way that's impactful. And that was really exciting. And from there, it really just kind of snowballed and grew, because I just got so many opportunities with so many different companies to learn. I touched on essentially almost every industry that you could think of. I did entertainment, I've done FinSec, I've done telecommunications, I did pharmaceuticals and the health industry. I had the luxury of being on one of the first health cloud products that was ever implemented, which was pretty cool. And that was a big thing, that Salesforce was breaking into the health industry, and they did that with Health Cloud. And I got the opportunity to be one of the first implementations of that. And I've had a lot of neat experiences through that process. And so I think that's taken me to where I am now, which is, truly just a Salesforce architect who's, really devoted to the platform, and trying to be even better than I am, the day before, in terms of understanding it, implementing the right solutions for the customer, and really driving change for their needs, whether that's sales, service, marketing, custom application space, especially now that, it's not a CRM anymore, right? It's not your grandfather's CRM anymore. This is something way bigger. This touches service, it touches communities and customer presence, it touches marketing. It's truly a full suite of tools that can help whatever you're looking to do. Salesforce can do it if you have the right implementation partner.
Yeah, I like that quote, not your grandfather's CRM anymore. And that's generally what a lot of people have that association with, right? Salesforce, yeah, it's CRM. In fact, their stock symbol is CRM. So that's what people think of when they think CRM. But tell us a little bit about what it does. And you touched on a little bit like Health Cloud, and what is the approach, and how do you see Salesforce kind of taking on these different verticals and offering these new products? Give us a sense of the breadth of that platform now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to point out is it did, right? It started as a CRM initially, and it was really designed as, managing those customer relationships. And so it focused heavily around its core object base of, you have accounts and you have contacts. And then it branched down into a sales tool with opportunities and, forecasting. And then into a service-oriented tool was kind of their next phase, right? And they gave us the ability to capture cases and manage the communications with your customers. So think chatbots and FAQ pages and knowledge base, and really a lot of those metrics around like call center was a big piece of that. And then from there, they've started to really pepper in, very specific verticals, right? You've got Finance Cloud, you've got Health Cloud, you've got your communities. If you want to, drive an e-commerce page, right, you can do that through Salesforce. So I think when you're looking at the platform and you're trying to say, what is this going to do for me? You need to pay attention to the fact that you can't just look at it like, oh, it's Salesforce. You have to look at their individual offerings and take a look and go down each of those roads, because they're so robust with features. They're just rich with out of the box functionality that's declarative in nature, right? Point and click, where it doesn't take complex development to go and build. You're not writing this from scratch. You actually go in and you turn on a feature and you can configure it. And you can have it up and running in some cases minutes, right? I'm not going to overly simplify it, right? Of course, there's configuration involved, and it takes some time to get the right solution up, but it definitely reduces that time. And so I would say, if you're looking to get in that space, take a few minutes to look at their site and go down the vertical that you think best suits for you. Or if you're looking for a marketing tool, look at their marketing options and see, what do they offer in terms of marketing. And don't worry so much about the platform holistically, like Salesforce, right? It's overwhelming of a tool now. Focus on specifically what you want, right? If I'm looking at marketing, let's go look at what Marketing Cloud offers. If I'm trying to deliver a service solution, great, let's go look at the Service Cloud offerings and figure out what's there. And then you can start to see where you have like your out of the box feature sets, things that Service Cloud offers right away, and then your add-ons that really start to, I love to use the phrase crawl, walk, run when I talk about developing and kind of implementing a system. And so, Salesforce is great with that, because crawl is, getting it ready and out the gate, right? Maybe you set up your case processes, right? And how your flows are gonna, how do you want to support your customers with case management? How are they going to submit a case? How are you going to work that case? How are you going to resolve that case? And then you get into, the walking and running aspects. And now you're talking about, leveraging, Einstein analytics in this thing and starting to bring some real business intelligence into how you're managing those cases. And now it's just not a matter of managing your process. It's actually enhancing your process. It's helping you, really drive some growth and maybe see trends and patterns and things that you weren't even seeing before. And they're going to help you do it with a tool that's turned on, right? You flip a switch and you configure it and you're off to the races.
Yeah, that's really powerful. So, I mean, just to look at it from a different perspective, it started off as a single kind of a one niche feature of CRM, which was a SaaS platform. You use it for customer relationship management, put your information there, run a bunch of reports, right? And then it expanded into multiple verticals. And you also had at the same time this low code, no code declarative approach of development, and to where now you pretty much have anything you can think of to integrate with your environment, your application landscape, tools that help you integrate, as well as, all the analytics and deep insights that you can get from the data itself. In addition to, of course, what you always had, which is the declarative nature of object modeling, as well as the declarative nature of reporting, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
That's extremely powerful. So what kind of pushback when you work with a lot of different clients, and that's your experience is really broad on this front. So you've been in a lot of different verticals, talked to a lot of different clients. And what are some of the common complaints that you feel are no longer applied to Salesforce? So I hear people still, and I was one of them, 2 years, 3 years ago, was like, hey, Lightning and, hadn't come in and wasn't fully adopted yet, but we were still on Apex and that kind of stuff. And there was a lot of complaints about the kludginess of that. Do you feel like some of that pushback and resistance really exists in the market?
Yeah, it definitely exists still. I think there's a lot of concepts around Salesforce being very proprietary, maybe not looking the way that most people would like. I think a lot of people are used to very custom solutions. And so they look at Salesforce, they're like, the out of the box, it doesn't look great. I don't like the way this looks. This isn't what I'm looking for. There's too much, too many settings. It's too big, too many things that I need to worry about. It's, I'd rather just roll a custom solution. Like, why am I not just rolling my own solution? What I would say to that though is I would say even more so today than even last year or really 2 years ago, Salesforce has done a really great job of moving away from that proprietary space of like a clunky, like this is a Salesforce specific tooling, to more of a broad, development sense and configuration sense. Like the no code, low code process, I don't know how anyone could truly complain about it, because I think it's just really well done. So like object modeling on the platform from almost day one was great. It's simple, it's easy to understand. There's a pretty good amount of options. It maybe isn't as robust as like your homegrown database, or if you have access to you're running your own SQL Server, your own Postgres, right? You might have a little more flexibility, but for the most part, Salesforce is where it needs to be. I think where some of that holdup would really came with process automation, was one place, right? Which Salesforce had, a pretty awesome evolution of process automation, and I'll walk through that in a second. And then user interface. I think those would be the two places where I think you'd get the most negative feedback on the platform. You mentioned Lightning. That's a great example. there's just an enormous resistance to Lightning. There was. I don't know that I would say there still is. I think anyone who's coming on today and learning about Lightning today, with no preconceived notion of what Lightning is, isn't going to resist that. I don't even think there's anything to resist anymore, right? They don't even sell Salesforce Classic anymore. You only have Salesforce Classic if you've been on the system for at least 3 years or longer. If you're coming in and buying it today, you're getting Lightning. But here are the things that Salesforce did that I think are key to making it really a platform that anyone should be thinking about using for almost all of their needs right now. I mean, certainly it doesn't do everything, but in terms of being a solid core platform, it checks a lot of boxes. The first thing is Lightning Web Components. So when Lightning first came out, this idea of the Lightning experience, the development that they pushed was this concept of an Aura component. Aura was supposed to replace Visualforce, and Visualforce was very clunky, right? So Visualforce was it was a proprietary markup language. It was, you could leverage a little HTML with it, but you still had to write Visualforce. And what it did was, if you wanted something custom, you needed to have a Visualforce page, and you completely replaced the standard function. So if you wanted a custom page, fine, you could have a Visualforce page, but you had to get rid of the standard page. Now you're entirely on Visualforce, and you got to support that going forward. You're now custom, and you're supporting custom. You've left the standard world. Aura was more modular, which is what they were going for, but it was still proprietary, right? So you were still dealing with markup that you had to go learn, right? So you're not going to go find someone on the street who just happens to know Aura. You'd have to teach them Aura, right? And maybe they're JavaScript developers, or they've got strong, HTML skills, and they're going to do fine and get up to speed really quick. But you still had the overhead of, how do I get someone up to speed on Aura? When they iterated to Lightning Web Components, it completely blew up that issue, because Lightning Web Components run off standards. That runs off the JavaScript standard. Anybody who's written, modern JavaScript is going to be able to jump in and write Lightning Web Components. It leverages, importing libraries, standard HTML markup is used. It's bundled together, so you've got your CSS and your HTML and your JavaScript separated out. It's not all kind of broke or grouped together. A lot of times, with Visualforce, they've just made it very modern. And now you can actually just go hire a JavaScript developer and you're good to go. So you've increased the talent pool, very, very considerably when you're looking for developers. So and then the other piece of that, the other trade-off that I think was really positive is, you no longer have to get rid of standard to go custom. We now have the ability, with the concept of Lightning pages, where we can have custom components and standard components all on one page. So we can change one thing and leave everything else standard, which means we can truly be 90% standard, 10% custom, achieve what we really want to have that's not possible with standard Salesforce, but not lose all of that standard functionality. So I think that was a big win for them. And that's something that, that exists today. That's very powerful. And then the other one is they've made tons of progress on this concept of flow, process automation. So, what they've done is they've gone through a concept of workflow. Then they went to something called Process Builder. And these both still exist today. You can still use these. Most instances will still have some of this. But then they moved to Flow. Flow is it's their most powerful tool yet, because it truly is realizing the low code motto that Salesforce puts up there, that whole no software sign. This really has enabled people to really do 90% of what you would have to have used code for in the past can now be done with Flow. And then they've made it almost seamless that you can now tie code into your flow. So just like Lightning pages allow you to replace just portions of the page with custom UI, you now have the ability to replace portions of your process automation with custom automation. And so now we really can hyper focus and say, you know what, I can send an email with Flow. I don't need to write custom Apex to fire off this attractive looking email, right? But maybe this other concept where I need to aggregate, across thousands of records to pull out values that I want to put in that email. Well, that's too complex. I can't do that in a Flow. Well, I can write an Apex module that does the aggregation for me, and then have it feed the Flow so that my email can pull those statistics or those values into the email and send it off. It's really powerful because it lets you really hyper focus your teams. you can have a really strong development team that focuses on those modules and a really strong admin who only has to focus on declarative, and they can really collaborate together seamlessly.
I love that. You covered so much in there. I just want to make sure everybody hears the evolution there is great, of course, because you have the historical context of how the previous iterations worked and didn't work and where we are now. But also the fact that how it changes the team dynamic, right? And allowing people to be used in the right way and not having to have different a whole bunch of developers, where you can have a lot of the business logic from business analysts kind of working with admins and getting that implemented very quickly without necessarily waiting for developers and testing and all that, the whole SDLC to happen, right? So that's very powerful. On that note, the concept of using flows and leveraging them, how popular is that, or is that still relatively new in the market that people really haven't started leveraging that functionality as much?
Yeah, it's still relatively new. So flows have been around for a while, for at least a couple of years, maybe even more than that. I think just recently they've started to make some real changes to those flows, even as early as just the last release, where we're starting to see functionality come out into those flows that are possible, that are making them even more attractive to use. So I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of people are they're ingrained with process builder and workflow, and so it's very difficult for them to break away from that and say I'm going to move to flow. And there's hesitancy to have both a process builder on an object and a flow, because best practice really says you want to try to consolidate that business logic into one thing, right? You're not going to have triggers, process builder, flows, all executing process automation for one object. And so I think the technical aspect of that is prohibiting a lot of people from just jumping right into flows. But I do believe that over the next 2 or 3 releases, there's just going to be so much more functionality that's thrown into it. And it's clear that they're focusing on this tooling as kind of the next iteration to the platform, that'll be attractive enough that people will finally make the time and allow for the budget to say, you know what, let's get our process builder off of this object. Let's move into flow. It does so much more for us. It's easier to control. And I think that's powerful. I would point out too, the biggest thing about it is that flow is going to allow them to have subflows, right? And so they can actually organize their business logic, right, into files almost, right, where I have this flow that does this, and it's not as monolithic anymore. It's very modular. I can call it from different places. So I look for that to happen pretty rapidly over the next year, 2 years. Yeah,
those are all very powerful functionality, especially when you look at the choices. And as you were contrasting earlier, doing custom development, where you can of course accomplish all of this stuff, but you just have to write all that code and maintain all that code. So is that what you would say to someone who says, hey, Salesforce is really expensive, and I still have to do a lot of development in it? What is your pitch there for that?
I mean, that would be my pitch. I think I would say, let's talk about how much development you're actually going to have to do here and what that development looks like. I think that the trade-off with Salesforce is, if it is more expensive than the other tool that you're looking at, right? How are you looking at that price tag, right? Are you looking at it, upfront today, comparing them one-to-one and saying, well, Salesforce is more expensive today than this tool? Then I think the argument would always be most likely, yeah, you're right, Salesforce is more expensive upfront. But I think if you looked at the return over the course of 5 years, 10 years, in terms of maintainability, scalability, and the types of resources that you have to hire and work with to build out that functionality, I don't know that Salesforce is actually all that much more expensive than a custom solution, or maybe a lower tier CRM platform that doesn't have nearly the robustness that Salesforce does.
Yeah, not to mention you don't have a DevOps guy anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be careful on that, because I think a lot of people will probably come hunt me down if I start saying you don't need DevOps. You definitely do need DevOps, right? I think the point is that it changes a little bit. So like, for example, right, like flows have built-in versioning, right? That helps quite a bit, right? You don't need DevOps to manage those versions per se. That's kind of done through the change sets. So there'll certainly be some people who roll it out who aren't going to be as complex enough to need DevOps. But I would also point out that Salesforce has some pretty cool DevOps functionality available. So Salesforce Dx, this is another up and coming tool set, right? They're still investing in it and it's still growing. And it's actually quite awesome. It ties right in with Git. And it is really a pretty solid tool. I've personally seen it, very well integrated with Jenkins to do some continuous integration functionality and help move things through the pipeline. And then there's also some tooling available as well. So Capado or Flossom are two tools that are out there that are installed into Salesforce. And so somewhat native, right? It's third party. It's not a Salesforce provided tool, but it plugs right in and it makes DevOps really simple. And so I think that even if you do end up needing DevOps, you're still going to find that there's going to be some tooling available to you that makes that pretty simple.
Yeah, no, I misspoke. I didn't mean to say DevOps. I meant more like system engineer stuff, right? Setting up servers, setting up, versioning,
Yes.
and
Yes.
all of
Yeah.
that stuff. So yeah,
that I agree with.
So even if you use Amazon and you're on EC2, you're still having to manage all of the versions. You can scale up and scale down, but you still gotta do all of that stuff, which of course you don't need to do with Salesforce. It's really Salesforce. If you look at it, there's an argument to be made that it's an application development platform rather than a SaaS platform, right?
Yep. Yeah, and I think if you look at it, there's a lot of, Salesforce themselves purchased Heroku, right? Which in a way, Heroku is a competitor to AWS, I think for at least today, right? And I think the idea behind that purchase and what they were trying to signal there is that there's still a place for those platforms, right? They're not trying to compete with AWS in that space. They are with Heroku, but the Salesforce as a platform, right, is not. It has a purpose, and I think as long as you're leveraging Salesforce for that purpose, right, if you're tying into one of the modules that they offer, whether it's Sales Cloud or Service Cloud or Community Cloud, it's gonna do a lot more for you for a lot less than trying to build that same feature out custom. And so building out your own CRM or your own process automation tool or your own marketing tool probably is going to be more, not probably, it's going to be more expensive long run than leveraging a tool like Salesforce out the box because they're good at it, right? And that's the other thing that I really love about Salesforce that I always remind people, especially when we're implementing and designing. They're releasing stuff every 3 months, right? There's new features and new functionality coming out, and so you get to tap in to all the resources that they're throwing at this thing, and they're servicing the biggest companies in the world use Salesforce. And so Salesforce is building to keep these guys interested in their product. So if you're a mid-market company and you're looking at this and saying it's so expensive, you have to consider the fact that you're also going to be getting features and functionality that some of the best, most successful companies in the world want and use. And that's because they're sitting with Salesforce and they're having these conversations. I used to sit with them all the time where they'd have customers coming in or solution implementers come in and they take feedback from us, from the customer and from the implementation teams, and then they incorporate it into their product and they release that every 3 months. And they've been doing that since the beginning. And I think with the exception of COVID, which disrupted everybody, they've never missed a release. They're always releasing every 3 months, new features across all of those modules. And that's super powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, obviously I'm not as much of nowhere near as much of an expert on Salesforce as you are, and this is super, super helpful. But just to play devil's advocate on this a little bit, stepping out of my depth here, but is that now the biggest problem with Salesforce is that there are way too many ways to do the same, to skin a cat, in other words, right? You could go with an API, you could go with, Apex, you could use the enterprise bus or whatever, right? So there's so many different ways to do the same thing, aren't there?
Yeah, there certainly are, and I would agree. That's definitely a difficult part of the platform, right? There's 4 different process automation tools at your hands that you have to decide on. So kind of keeping up with best practice and what's the right thing to do is a really difficult thing to get over. And that's why I think I would encourage anyone looking to get on the platform to also, consider looking for someone who is a SME or an expert on this to help guide them on those best practices. Someone who's seen this done over and over and over again. And I'm not trying to plug myself here. I think it sounds like I am, but I mean, that's kind of the concept. Like, I've seen a lot of companies use Salesforce and use it improperly, and end up being in a position where they're not able to take advantage of those releases that are coming out every 3 months because they've gone fully custom, or they've misused an object, or they're not using an object. And so, that is a part of the platform. It is robust and it's difficult to navigate all on your own. You're not necessarily going to jump into the platform and just, in a couple of weeks, be up to speed and understand the right stuff to do. Especially because there's, other things, right? It's a shared resource. So Salesforce imposes a concept known as governor limits that help protect themselves from misuse. And so you have to know how to navigate those so that as you're designing and building things out, you're not going to run up against those and get shut down unexpectedly. So there's certainly some nuances to the platform that do make it tricky. But I think the fastest way out of there is to go to the community and either look for an SI like Informulate to kind of help guide you through that process of how do I properly use this tool, right? Here's my business case. Tell me how this tool can help solve this business case. People like us, we're going to be able to answer those questions, quite easily. And then, the other option too is there's a large community out there. There's community groups that meet. Again, pre-COVID, I'm sure they'll come back where, you can actually have meet and greets with your local community and meet with users, meet with admins, meet with developers, meet with, just all sorts of people through the community. And it's pretty awesome. And then Salesforce themselves also provides, in my opinion, hands down, one of the best training resources that I've seen any company ever put out there. And that's Trailhead. So they don't keep anything secret. It's actually really easy to get your hands on it, play with it. You get a sandbox. You can actually see this stuff in real time, follow step-by-step instructions for it to happen. And they're even releasing this now for corporations so that you can actually tap into their education platform, Trailhead, and use that for your own corporation. So you can put your own training in front of your employees to use the platform.
That is awesome. Well, you made my pitch for me, but I'm assuming with all of this that you don't feel any regret for the last 15 years of you having invested in the Salesforce platform. I'm not sensing any regret there.
No, I don't think so. I keep my eyes open. I'm still waiting for the shoe to drop on Salesforce, but I think it's only going up from here for a little while at least. I can't see an end in sight. And every time I think the platform's slowing down or maybe it's, someone else is going to come out and present a better option, Salesforce surprises me. And I think, they keep buying, new companies, investing in new technologies. And I definitely think there's some vision there that's pretty awesome. So I'm glad I hitched myself to that star because it's certainly going places.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, no, that's the point you made also about, it is super powerful. Like there's so much stuff that you can do with it. And while you want to have that power, you have to have somebody who can kind of be that Sherpa, be the guide to help you pick the right tool set, because there's so many choices for tools that you can pay for, and there's separate subscriptions for each of the different tools that you want to use or not use. And then knowing how to use those tools in what context and having those kind of what is the operational range of this particular thing, and where to use this versus using that is really key. Because if you don't make those choices the right way, then it does end up getting expensive and clunky. And and part of it is, like you said, the technical debt of knowing how to make yourself future proof with Salesforce, so that you kind of have you need a little bit of leadership and guidance around where Salesforce is going next. So maybe that's a great question to ask now: is what's going to happen? I mean, obviously we talked about the current product suite, but what do you think is coming down the pike, and what are you excited about, and what should people be thinking about for next things coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. I still see Salesforce putting a lot of focus and energy into AI. And I don't know what that stands for anymore, whether it's augmented intelligence or artificial. But it's definitely a lot of focus on making your data smarter for you, and lowering the entrance barrier to that, which I think is pretty fantastic. And so that feature set is known as Einstein. And I think that's a big piece of it. And then I also see them branching out into some verticals as well, which they already have, but like going heavier into the health space is a big piece for them, right? So if you're in the health space, I think you can look to see a lot of new feature sets. Same with finance, and starting to learn, how to really provide value in those sectors. And then process automation and lowering and improving their no code solution. Like they're really driving a lot into flow, into their integration patterns. I would consider, platform events to be a big piece of that new integration strategy. They recently purchased MuleSoft, so they're going big into kind of, integration as a company. And I also think that they're aware and leaning into the idea of a multi-cloud world. And they're not trying to necessarily be your only cloud, right? They're trying to make themselves play nice with that multi-cloud approach, which I think is super helpful, especially for some of the larger companies out there, because they're not going to have just one cloud, right? Amazon and Microsoft and Google, those are all going to be in the space. They're gonna be there in some capacity, whether that's through identity, custom application development, you name it, right? They're gonna be there, and Salesforce is learning, how do we still provide value and work with those other cloud spaces, and so I think that's where a lot of their focus will be.
That is a very important point, because a lot of times one of the fears people have at Salesforce is that it's kind of a walled garden, like you got to use the stuff that's in there, but you can't really, it's a lot of effort to integrate externally, or you have to write your own customer integrations. I know that's not true, but I think it's a very important point to bring up, especially with the future direction, is that it's going to get more and more open rather than more and more closed. And can you give us a little sample of some of the ways that they integrate with some of these external clouds and other platforms?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think the best example of this is not so much how Salesforce is integrating with those other clouds as much as to show how those other clouds are integrating with Salesforce. So I think the best example is that Amazon recently released a new connector they have a product called AppFlow, and they've just recently released a pre-built connector for Salesforce. So, Salesforce had Heroku and Heroku Connect, and that was a great way to move data back and forth between like a Postgres database and Salesforce. Amazon now provides a very similar feature with this AppFlow in the pre-built Salesforce connector, that you can now move data from Salesforce into your Amazon space and put it where you want it, whether it's Redshift or Postgres or whatever database solution you're looking for. That data can move back and forth, and there's a pre-built connector. And there's a lot of products that have that, right? Informatica's got a pre-built connector. MuleSoft, obviously, as a Salesforce product, is a great one, right? And MuleSoft has connectors to all those cloud spaces. Amazon is now doing it. So I think you'll find that they all are ready to talk to each other. And because Salesforce is an API first platform, everything that they do sits on top of their REST API. Those communications are really easy. So even if one doesn't exist for whatever software or application you're trying to connect it to, making that happen is super easy because of that REST API that Salesforce sits on top of.
Great answer. Yeah, I really appreciate your time, Jim. And just to kind of wrap up this conversation into, what is it, how does it relate to digital transformation? I think digital transformation for me is about taking your existing non-digital businesses and making it digital. So taking manual processes, taking disparate data sources and bringing it together, taking your business processes that are often informal and making them formalized into a digital workflow, process automation, like we talked about, insights and analytics. All of this stuff is really coming together in one platform for Salesforce. Of course, it depends on whether, all of your data is in there in order for you to leverage all of this stuff. But if that's not the case, then as you just shared, the integration options, the API, all of those come into play to really enable you to, like you said, play well with others in terms of the other applications and suites you have in your application landscape. So I honestly, when I first started with Salesforce, I didn't have a great opinion of it like 5, 6, 7 years ago. But over the last, I want to say 3 to 4 years, once Lightning has come out, and then we started really getting into it at Informulate. And then, of course, once you joined was really when we started looking at not just Salesforce implementation, but Salesforce architecture and really guidance and best practices and helping clients to really make the most of their Salesforce investment. I think we both are evangelists of Salesforce. You always probably been one, but I'm definitely becoming an evangelist of Salesforce as well. just knowing the platform and the power of it, and also the aggressive, like you said, the new features coming out every quarter, and all the new things that they're looking to do with AI and Internet of Things and Einstein and all of this stuff that's coming down the pike. So, what would you want to leave the audience with in terms of if you're thinking about digital transformation, how does Salesforce play into that strategy?
Yeah, I think I'd say if you can dream it, Salesforce can help you do it, and it can really make a big difference to not only what that transformation looks like, but how quickly that transformation becomes a reality. That this is a tool that helps enable you fast so that you can catch up to where a lot of people have already gotten to, because they were on the train, I guess, before. And so if you want to get there and get there fast, really consider Salesforce as your option.
Absolutely. Cool. With that, Jim, I really appreciate your time. This was a wealth of knowledge. And for anybody who's listening, Salesforce is an option for you. It is actually not as expensive as some people believe once you do the full math on the total cost of ownership of a Salesforce app versus a custom app. So thank you so much for sharing all your thoughts, and especially the history. I really enjoyed learning the history of some of these products and how they came about. So thanks a lot, Jim. Keep
Thank
rocking
you.
it. Great talking to you.
Thanks, Rajiv.
See ya.